Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 78 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. This is going to be a solo episode, and in this one I'm going to share some thoughts and reflections that come from last week's visit to Book Expo America. I'm going to explain a little bit about what the fair is, why the fair is, my impression and thoughts of this year's fair, and a bit about its history, as well as a few news items related to things that happened last week. And there's usually a lot of publishing industry news that happens. A lot of publishers will wait until Book Expo America to announce things, and sometimes deals actually happen at BEA that get announced, and that's one of the things I'm going to talk about. But first I wanted to share some comments from last week's episode, and also to welcome new patron to the episode, Stanley B. Trice. Stanley, welcome to this small but powerful team of those who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. And for as little as $1 a month, you too can support the show and gain access to additional text, audio, and video content that I make available to patrons, such as the free audio version of the book, The 7 Ps of Publishing Success, and additional bonus reflections on other podcast episodes that I release usually every month. I'm due to record another one soon, so thanks, Stanley, and to all the other patrons of the show. I'm actually getting close to the first bonus level of patron support, where I will do a Q&A episode specifically for patrons answering questions that come in. So that will be a fun thing to do, and an extra bonus for those of you to get. Now, in terms of comments, Pranathi left a comment on starkreflections.ca for last episode, for episode 77, which was an interview with Christine Catherine Rush, and Pranathi was referring to the writing with chronic illness part of our conversation, which is the title of a book that Chris was recently released and was talking about. And Pranathi says, great interview. It's amazing what exercise, nutrition, and decreased stress in any form can do for creativity. Glad she is doing better with the move. And that was Chris talking about moving from the Oregon West Coast to Las Vegas. And then I had to laugh because Pranathi also commented on my own admission of a verbal typo that I had made in that episode, and said, I can totally see turning new kids into kids in the hall and vice versa. Thank you, Pranathi, for your understanding. So thanks, Pranathi, and thanks, Stanley. Your patronage and your comments and your interaction with the podcast really do mean a lot to me. As writers, we're often operating in our own little vacuums, our own little bubbles, and the ongoing touch points and the connections that happen throughout the week make a huge difference. And I love interacting with you Reflectives, and I love hearing your comments and feedback, because that also helps me understand what's resonating with you, and gives me an idea of what I can do more of and what I should do less of, such as the tongue twisters. Previous commenters and those who filled out my survey talked about skipping through the tongue twisters, so I don't do the tongue twisters anymore, because the majority of comments I got found it annoying, and I thought, well, I don't want to annoy you. I want to actually provide value and potentially some entertainment for your week. So you can comment on episodes of the podcast over at starkreflections.ca, or you can @ me on Twitter. I'm @ Mark Leslie. Now, in lieu of a personal update this week, I want to share something that I spotted and already shared on the Stark Publishing page on Facebook just this morning. And it is Wednesday, June 5th when I'm recording this, because I actually have to make another trip. Even though I got back from New York late Monday night, I have to go back to New York for a meeting on Thursday, and it's a meeting with the BISG, the Book Industry Study Group. And it's a 2-hour meeting from 10 a.m. till 12 p.m. about print-on-demand opportunities. And I've long been involved in print-on-demand. Now, with Draft to Digital, of course, we are in beta release for partnering with IPG on getting authors' books for free distributed into the market the way you would get your print-on-demand books out there via Spark. But it's kind of like, I consider it like a Spark Lite solution, where it's easier for just push a few buttons, convert your Word document into print, and you're up and running. Now, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of Ingram Spark, but I think it's a really great option and opportunity for writers. So I'm going to be going there just to connect with some of the people about print on demand, because again, part of my role with Draft to Digital is looking for opportunities for authors who have print-on-demand books available, and I'll be exploring that and obviously exploring different things that Draft to Digital can do with them. And of course, I've long been involved with POD because I used to run an espresso book machine prior to my Kobo days. So that's going to be a fun one because I am going early in the morning, Thursday. I fly out at 7:30 a.m. or 6:30 a.m., something like that. Get into New York, probably just in time, maybe an hour to spare. Buffer time to get to the meeting in Midtown New York. Do the meeting. I'm probably going to pop into Shakespeare & Company. I want to check out their business. They were an independent book chain that actually went out of business, and then they were purchased by Dane Neller, who owns On Demand Books in New York. And I'm just going to go explore them because there's two. There's one on the east side of Manhattan and one on the west side. And both locations have espresso book machines, print on demand. So I want to go there because I didn't get a chance to pop in there when I was in New York recently, because my business days were filled with Book Expo America meetings, and my pleasure days were filled with breweries. And I only made it into 2 bookstores, and unfortunately it wasn't Shakespeare & Company when I was there. But then I get back a Thursday night from New York, and then Friday morning I'm driving up to Sudbury, Ontario, where this weekend I have a table at GraphicCon, which is basically a Comic-Con in Sudbury, Ontario, and it's always a lot of fun. It's a small con, but thousands of people go through there, and I always have a fantastic time. So I'm looking forward to that, but that means lots of travel, so getting this episode recorded a little bit earlier than normal. So that's it for personal update. In terms of the thing I wanted to share just before we get into the main content was there was recently a post I saw that Penguin Random House shared on their blog, and over at starkreflections.ca there'll be a link to this in the show notes. And this is something that was interesting to share. And so the Book Lover's Guide to Publishing, and I'm just talking about part 1. And what it was is a bunch of blog posts that are featuring short interviews with Penguin Random House employees from various departments to get sort of an inside scoop on their jobs and how they help create the books that people read and love. Now, the blog posts were meant for readers, but I think it can be a useful look at the publishing industry from the world's largest publisher. And so here are some examples of some of the things that this first post talks about. Now, how many books does Penguin Random House publish each year? Well, they publish over 70,000 digital and 15,000 print books each year. Although these official copies line bookshelves around the globe, they aren't the only versions to exist. Before the final copies are printed, of course, they produce ARCs, Advanced Reading Copies, or Advanced Readers Copies, galleys, and RBMs, which are reformatted bound manuscripts. They also go into a very high-level look at how do books actually get from the printer to bookstores. They talk about the differences between advertising and publicity, as well as literary awards. And what I like about this blog series is it's a really high level. And if you're looking to learn a little bit more about the overall industry and some of the things related to traditional publishing, I advise you to check that series out, and there'll be a link to post 1 and the series in the show notes. Although I have to laugh because they in the logo, the image for it, they use the quote, "those who know best." And I cheekily laugh at that because I think it's a little bit ironic, and I would like to change it to "those who know best about gatekeeping and shipping dead trees around," which I'll probably talk a little bit about later in this episode. But that's it for the preamble. I'm going to share a word from our sponsor and then get right into the topic for this episode. This episode's sponsor is Findaway Voices, and what I'm going to include in the update from the sponsor this week is some useful promotional tips using audio to promote your work. Now, this came in a recent message/newsletter from Findaway Voices, and it's off of their blog, and the blog title is called Here's How to Use Headliner to Promote Your Audiobook on Your Social Media Channels. Now, this is using headliner.app, A-P-P. Which is a freemium model. So it's easy, it's quick, it's free. And what it does is it creates an audio sample in a shareable format, which they call an audiogram. Now, audiograms act as a video clip that lets viewers know that audio is playing on your post because they have these little waveforms that show with the audio. So you can actually see, it's sort of a trigger when you're scrolling that there is audio there. So, if your default settings on Facebook or Instagram, for example, are not to have audio on, you can just tap on it and then suddenly hear the audio. So that kind of captures your attention. Because this way, a browser or someone who's scrolling is more likely to stop, unmute, and engage with your content. So in this post, they walk through 4 examples of things such as audiogram for an audiobook, a plain audiogram, and a minimalist audiogram. In some of the examples, they show the shareable image/video that you can see the audiogram or the sound wave directly below the title, and that way if someone, as I said, if someone's scrolling Facebook, they'll see the audiogram moving, they'll know audio is playing, and that makes them much more likely to engage, which is what you want. You want them to engage, you want them to listen. So one example shows the audiogram at the top of the image, and then captions, because you can actually have auto captions at the bottom. And again, it's a great additional way to get access. Now, I was playing around with it earlier. I used a clip from episode 77. I've shared that on Twitter, shared it on Instagram, and shared it on Facebook. Now, with the free tier on headliner.app, you get 10 videos per month, unlimited watermark videos. So after you go past the 10 that month, there's watermarked videos, obviously, to advertise Headliner, which is a great freemium model, meaning you can still use it, but it also helps advertise where the platform is, which is great for them. And then there's also transcriptions. So again, it'll transcribe your audio, which you can clean up and edit if it's wrong, which often it's about 90% accurate usually. And then you can share it directly to social networks, which is kind of cool, from the app or from online. And it's uploaded in 1080p quality. And it's as simple as this. You select your audio, you choose the start and end duration. So for Instagram, for example, the clips are less than 60 seconds. For Facebook, you don't really have to worry about length. And there's a button that automatically clips it down to the time for specific formats like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. Next, you choose your aspect ratio, or like landscape for Facebook and Twitter, or square for Instagram, for example. And then you customize your wave color, so the audio wave color, which is cool, the wave type, because there's different styles of waves, the position on the image, and then the background image. You can upload an image, there's some templates, there's some free ones you can use. Then it's going to, if you want, generate an audio transcript. So again, people who leave the sound off can hear what's being said. And you can also edit that, you can adjust the size, color, and location, and that way you have an audiogram shareable in a simple few clicks, which is kind of cool. So I'll probably be doing some more experimentation there because, again, it's great to have audiobooks out there, but I'm also really curious about how we can promote and share audio content, such as this podcast, such as some of the audio books that I have available. If you want to learn more about Findaway Voices, you can check them out over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. Okay, now let's get to some of my post-BEA 2019 reflections. First off, let me explain what Book Expo America is, because I've been in the industry for a while and I'm quite familiar with it. But for listeners who aren't familiar with what it is, I thought I'd give a quick primer on it, just so that we're all speaking the same language here. There are 3 major English language book shows in the world. But Frankfurt Book Fair is the largest. The second largest is the London Book Fair. And then the third largest is Book Expo America, or BEA for short. Now, there used to be a smaller one in Canada, and it was held in Toronto just before or after BEA. And the reason they did this is publishers were already traveling to New York, usually for the end of May. And they would either leave New York and come to Toronto. I think that's how it worked. Or they would leave They would come to Toronto first and then go to New York. So it saved them money, right? So instead of it just being a 3-day show in one city, it was sort of 6 days over the course of a week, and they were all in Eastern North America. Now, the one in Canada was originally called CBA. It was the Canadian Booksellers Association. So that's where the independent booksellers from across Canada would gather for their annual meetings. And I was a member of the board for many, many years. I was a campus representative. Then I became vice president. And then I became president. But just as I was joining the board, the Canadian Booksellers Association had just sold the conference to Reed, which I believe also run Book Expo America, and then it became known as Book Expo Canada, or BEC, but it died off just a few years after CBA sold it to Reed. Now, I think it's mostly because Reed just kept charging more and more for spaces. Now, when I was paying for booths at Book Expo America for Kobo Writing Life years ago, it was ridiculous, the thousands of dollars I would pay for a tiny space, and then I had to pay for carpeting on top of that, which just drove me nuts. And it's my impression that what happened is they just kept charging publishers more and more for smaller and smaller real estate, and they were doing it in a market that was changing, and some publishers were dying off, and it was a time when independent booksellers were feeling a really major squeeze, and some of them were going out of business from the big box store hit that they took, as well as from the encroachment of the Amazons of the world, who were taking more and more of print book market share. So Book Expo Canada died many, many years ago, so there's still only those 3 big book fairs. But what are these fairs about? So what Book Expo America is really, it's sort of related to the way that traditional publishing works. So the whole idea behind something like Book Expo America, apart from the meetings of agents and editors and rights selling and stuff, which also takes place there, are booksellers and the buyers from the major book chains. That would include Costco, that would include the Powells, like the smaller independent book chains, that would include Barnes & Noble and Chapters Indigo and stuff like that. They're going to the show where the publishers are showing off. Basically, it's a show. They have booths with their titles. They're showing off their fall titles. So, in May and in June is when the booksellers are putting in their orders to publishers for what books they're going to buy for the Christmas season, which is the fall release. So there's basically 4 cycles to the calendar for buying seasons, or in some cases 3 catalog seasons, but the big one is Christmas. The big one is when the stocks start to arrive, usually the middle of August through to the middle of December, and that's the big Christmas buy. So there's a lot of publishers that are there showcasing their wares, handing out advanced readers' copies or bound galleys or information. The authors are often there with advanced readers' copies, signing them, so booksellers are lining up, and it's a wonderful opportunity. I've had the opportunity to interview and meet authors that I have adored for ages, like Michael Connolly. And it's been a really great opportunity. So it's a really exciting show with a lot of buzz. It's also a show where a lot of press releases are announced, and new partnerships and new collaborations are usually announced at a show like this. Now, this particular show, I have not been to Book Expo America in 2 years. So it had been 2 years since I had been to the show. And even when I started, I think it was a little bit more than a dozen years ago or so, first started going to shows like Book Expo America, it was way larger. Now, I used to compare the one in New York to the one in Canada. The one in New York was often, 2 different floors. Frankfurt is multiple buildings and multiple floors in buildings, but Book Expo America used to be 2 floors. And now it's been reduced to 1, and it's not even the full show that it used to be, because it used to extend across the top floor of the Javits Center. There were 2 other shows going on simultaneously at the same time, using some of the space downstairs that used to be book space when I first started going. But even the space upstairs was not even fully utilized. They run BookCon, which is more of a reader-facing thing on the Saturday, and the BookCon area was usually used to be part of the main show, and then the publishers would usually have slightly smaller booths, and they would shuffle over from their gigantic booths over to the BookCon. But BookCon was completely blocked off and sort of pre-set up, with the exception of some of the publishers that were moving some of their stuff over. And it was really, it was sad. Now, I saw some good things at Book Expo America. So part of the smaller section of the main Javits Center was reserved for, it was called Unbound, and I thought that was really creative and a really wonderful opportunity for Book Expo America. So Unbound was specifically the vendors who work with retailers and bookstores to sell non-book merchandise. And as the margins in books are so small for bookstores, the margin in gift items and other knickknacks and tchotchkes and other things that you can sell that are related to a book culture, there's actually more margin in there. And so a lot of bookstores are finding that they have to carry that merchandise in order to actually make a profit and actually keep the lights on, because of the shrinking margin with the book industry. So it was really, really interesting to see how that has changed. And there is actually a section, and very creatively released as Unbound, which I thought was really, really cool. But there's so many dead spaces and blank spaces and booths where people didn't even show up, which sometimes happens for travel, and there were some travel issues with weather last week. But there was it was really sad to see, because it's still a major show and it's still a big show, but you're looking at it and you're going, wow. When I used to have a meeting at booth 1000, like in aisle 1000, and I had to be at 2500, for example, for another meeting, it would sometimes take me, 10 minutes or 15 minutes to get across the convention center. Whereas even on the busiest times of this show, I could easily do it within the span of a few minutes. Yeah, there were still crowds and still the slow walkers in front of me, but I managed to do that without issue. And so, one of the first things I did when I got there on Wednesday is I went, okay, where are all my meetings? So that in advance, when I had some free time on the Wednesday before my first meeting, I just went to make sure I could get from one spot to the other. And I went, whoa, this is way easier than it has ever been. So that was a significant change. I think one of the other changes was there was no Amazon at the show at all. And Amazon used to have a gigantic booth. Of course, Kobo used to have a gigantic booth too. So no Amazon presence at all. Kobo didn't even have a booth there. I met with a Kobo rep on behalf of Draft to Digital, and it was great. And we just sort of meet at the Starbucks. And that's what we were doing as Draft to Digital. There was no reason for a company that specifically works directly with authors to get their books out on the market to be there, because there weren't a lot. There were authors there, but it's not like going to Romance Writers of America conference or Novelists Inc., where it is all authors and you could get a really great opportunity to connect. Now, I did connect with some authors, which there are going to be authors there. And of course, there's bookseller authors and publisher authors and all that other stuff. But it's not primarily a space to network with authors. It's primarily a space for publishers and booksellers to get together, and even more and more traditional print booksellers as opposed to digital booksellers. There were folks from Sarah from Nook Press was there as well, from Barnes Noble, and again, I did not see a Nook booth, but I know she was having meetings with folks just like I was as well. So that was an interesting thing about the show. I think part of Book Expo America has always been a celebration of the love for books, and there's still a vibe of that, and I still appreciate that, and it's great to connect with so many people. But I'm going to get into it a little bit later as to that's changed a little bit, and there was even a vibe a number of years ago when there was a lot more digital presence at the show, a lot more support and belief in the growth of digital. Now, digital is continuing to grow because it's still, for most readers, represents about 20% of the industry. 80% of it is print, and 20% of it is ebooks. And it's still growing year by year. It could be as high as 30% in some of the English language markets. But that's one of the reasons why independent authors believe that publishers have their heads up their butts, is because indie authors are usually focusing 100% or 90% of their attention on ebooks, and usually ebooks only on Amazon, whereas publishers are focusing on the distribution of books, print books, into the traditional market of bookstores and Costco's and Walmart's and all the different retailers that stock their books. And those are two completely different businesses in some regards. So, when publishers shake their head at independent authors or self-published authors and think that digital is dead, they're only seeing what they see, which is them selling and making a lot of money off of print books. And indie authors shake their head at the idiocy that they see of publishers ignoring digital because they're making all their money in digital books. And so it's really, really interesting to see how BEA is kind of migrated away from digital, almost as if it was a passing fad or a passing fancy, like, maybe like VHS or Betamax in the video industry, or something like 8-tracks. But there were still digital boosts there, and there were some digital service providers there, but nowhere near the extent of what it used to be in the, in the digital tipping point of the industry. So that was interesting. Now I'm going to share an announcement from Book Expo America, and then I'm also going to share just sort of a reflection on an independent author that I bumped into at the show and some of the conversations that we had. So, when I was at Book Expo America last week, I watched Michael and Judith Underlay from LMBPN Publishing. And this, if you're not familiar, Michael Underlay is sort of the head, or the guy who created the concept of 20 books to 50K. And in a nutshell, Michael looked at his sales that he was making on Amazon with his ebooks, and he said, I'm selling X number of copies of this book a day, and I'm making this much money. If I were to increase that and sell as many copies of my new books as I have, if I can get to 20 books, I can probably make $50,000 a year US on my books, and therefore I can live a comfortable life and quit my job and just write, which is what he wanted to do. Well, Michael proved that model because he got to way more than 50K way before 20 books, and proved that model is one that works. Of course, it's a publish fast, fail hard kind of publishing model of constantly pumping out content. But Michael and his wife Judith run this publishing company with a whole bunch of other really smart people and a whole bunch of authors, and are creating in a very, and I like to liken it as in a very Harlequin style. When you look at the Harlequin model of serving the needs of their readers perfectly fine. And as a bookseller, I can tell you that Harlequin was a publisher that really understood their customer, just like LMBPN understands their customer. And they served that need perfectly. And they churned out content very specifically to satisfy the readers. And that's what Michael's business publishing house kind of does. So I watched Michael and Judith. I didn't even really get a chance to chat with them for more than a few minutes because I watched them motoring around, always very purposefully going from meeting to meeting, always very driven. I mean, they were on a mission, and it was wonderful to see. And normally at some of the other conferences where I've hung out with them, I get the pleasure of, sitting down and having a meal or a drink with them and just enjoying their company. But this time we kind of passed each other like constantly on the trade floor and like shook hands and said, hey, we're going to get together later on, right? Yep. And we would tell each other that. Of course, we never did. But then I saw shortly after BEA this announcement of a deal that they struck with Dreamscape. And I'm going to read a little bit from the press release here. The title is Announcement of Audio Publishing Agreement between LMBPN Publishing and Dreamscape Media. Stephen Campbell, Vice President of Audio and Operations at LMBPN, said, through this agreement, LMBPN will increase its global presence in the audiobook market by making our books available to listeners on a variety of new platforms. This expanded reach is a major component of our global strategy, and we are excited to begin implementation as we continue to grow in 2019. Lorna Henry, Acquisitions Director at Dreamscape Media, adds, LMBPN's impressive success in the merging of paranormal and sci-fi elements in their publishing program is indicative of its ability to publish books fans want to read. Through our expertise in producing high-quality, entertaining audiobooks, Dreamscape will take their success in the ebook market and catapult it to new heights in the audio space. We are pleased that LMBPN has chosen to partner with us and to bring their content to customers, partners, and platforms around the world. LMBPN's audiobook collection will be available everywhere audiobooks are sold, including Audible, iTunes, and Kobo. I should probably say Apple audiobooks rather than iTunes, but I'm not judging. Titles will also be available on Hoopla Digital, Midwest Tapes Mobile, and online service for public libraries. Now, this is pretty exciting because a lot of LMBPN's titles have been Amazon exclusive or Audible. Their audio has been Audible exclusive, so this is really a huge step forward and one of those exciting deals that I've been waiting for. Now, the merger of Self or indie publishing digital success with the success from a larger player in the traditional publishing space is really exciting to me, and so I'm paying attention to things like this quite with quite a bit of interest. It's not quite the print-only deal that I'm still waiting to be struck, like a proper one, not the previous print-only deals where there's this huge advance made and it was paid out and the publisher didn't make as much money as they thought they would, and then the author and the publisher both got a sour taste in their mouth and they never went forward. But I'm thinking about a proper print-only one where both the author and the publisher make money and they both realize that working together they can reach audiences that neither one of them could reach in all those ways without collaborating. Now, I have long said that the only thing that I know for sure about the future of publishing is that it's going to involve more collaboration than ever before. And this is the perfect example. Michael and Judith are brilliant. Yes, they're fun to hang out with and creative writers, but they're brilliant business people. They have a passion not only for helping authors, but they have a passion for connecting with readers. And to see them connect with Dreamscape is really, really exciting, and I think will help open up opportunities of collaborations in the future. So that's something I'm going to continue to keep an eye on. And congratulations to Michael and Judith and all the great folks at LMBPN Publishing, as well as the smart folks at Dreamscape, for seeing this value in this growing indie publishing movement and actually being willing to take part in it and leverage it together. So congratulations to both groups, and I'm really excited about watching what happens next there. Now, I also had the good fortune to spend some time hanging out with James A. Hunter and his wife Jeanette when I was at BEA. Now, to break it down, together they run Shadow Alley Press, and like so many successful indie author ventures, like the one we just talked about with LMBPN and Wordfire Press and WMG Publishing, their press, which started with James's books, they've grown to include 7 other authors, and they have an ever-expanding imprint of titles that they're releasing. Now, they were at Book Expo America, and they were looking to get into that next frontier of publishing. Now, they have conquered digital. They've had millions of books sold, hundreds of thousands of dollars earned for them and their authors, huge successes for their titles and for their authors. One of their recently acquired authors in the last year started earning so much from writing books for Shadow Alley Press that he was actually able to quit his day job and write full time. So again, they've created this business model that's really progressive, really forward, and is appealing to their target audiences in brilliant ways. So James and Jeanette were in New York at BEA. They were looking to connect more with traditional publishing. They were looking for someone forward-thinking enough to get their books into bookstores. Now, I jokingly refer to this desire to get one's books into bookstores, particularly after you've already had huge successes in ebook publishing. I call that vanity publishing. And it's quite a significant shift from the use of that term for self-publishing back in the dark ages of publishing, more than 10 or 12 years ago, when vanity publishing was those who paid to publish their own work. Now, in my mind, you make your money, you're more likely to make better money self-publishing and publishing ebooks, and vanity publishing is signing up with a publisher, for less money, less royalties, just for the vanity of seeing your books on a bookstore shelf. But that's still a significant thing, and I'm never going to look down my nose at that type of vanity publishing because I do vanity publishing. I sign deals. I can't explain how exciting it is to walk into a bookstore and see your book on the shelf, or walk into a Costco and see your book on the shelf. And I will continue to do that because I know that there are many of my books that are better suited for print book sales as opposed to ebook sales. And that's just fine with me, because as a writer, what I really, really want is I really want to connect with people who read the things that I write. And that's valuable and important to me. So when I think about that the divide between ebooks and print books, this is something that Dean Wesley Smith and I often argue over. Now, he says indie authors and indie publishers can get their books into bookstores, and he's right. But the investment and the risk are so substantial. And you have, in my mind, you have to be a powerhouse like Dean Wesley Smith in order to make that happen properly. You can't be a Mark Leslie where nobody knows who you are. I mean, even Dean Wesley Smith is hugely successful and New York Times bestselling as many times as he has been, is still not as well known as somebody like James Patterson, for example. And the trick is, I think, that if done improperly, a company like Shadow Alley or LMBPN, they can go from earning hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars that they do in ebooks to losing it all, or all that profit, because that's something that is already pre-built into the business model of big publishers' budget. There's the risk and cost of returns. Now, I'm gonna give you a personal example, because when I first set up my books on Ingram Lightning Source, which is kind of like the tougher back end that Ingram Spark is the front end for. In 2004, I made my book fully returnable, and I gave it a full trade discount, so a full 50%, because having been a bookstore buyer, I knew that bookstores are less likely to ever just order stock that's not returnable, and they wanted the full discount. So it was great that I could call up a Barnes & Noble when I was traveling and say, hey, I'm going to be in town for a book signing in 3 months. My book's available through Ingram. You can order it. It's fully returnable. You get the full 50% discount. Would you be willing to have me? And they would have me, because there was very little risk. I'd come in, do a lunchtime book signing, and it would work out well. And it was really, really cool when one of the buyers at Chapters, which is Canada's bookstore chain, or Chapters Indigo, when they bought stock of my book. And it was fantastic when 600 copies of that book went into bookstores. But it was not as exciting when 3.5 months later, 300 copies came back, because I lost more money on those returns than I did on the sale. And I had it set up for them to destroy the returns rather than ship them to me, because the shipping back to me would cost an additional amount of money, and I had no place to warehouse books. Wasn't in the business of wanting to do warehousing. That's why I use print on demand, which is the cost is higher per unit, because you're not printing 1,000 copies at a time, for example. So it took me a good 6 or 7 months to dig myself back out from under the red. And that's the difference between indie publishing and the way that they work, and big publishers and the way that they work in print. So with indie publishing, they publish a title, like let's think of Shadow Alley or LMPGN. They publish a title, and all the resources are put into the titles, and usually all of the titles that they publish make money. And they earn back their investment, tenfold or more. Now, in big publishing, and maybe this is perhaps because of the way over the decades, all of the little imprints kept getting absorbed by bigger and bigger imprints and publishers, and have all been absorbed into. I think when I started in this industry, there were 12 to 15 of the big publishers. Now they're the big 5. They've all been absorbed into another one, kind of like the Borg.
We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile.
You will be assimilated. Now, in those cases, a publisher releases, let's say, 100 titles in that season, knowing that maybe 10 of them, if they're lucky, will make enough money to cover the cost of the loss on the other 90 titles. The problem is, half the time they're not quite sure. They may be sure of 1 or 2 of those titles, usually the Stephen Kings and the J.K. Rowlings and the James Pattersons. Those are the ones they know they're going to make money on. But then there's the other ones, the other handful they go we're not sure what's going to make up the other 5 of those 10. So we're going to publish all 100, and we know that the money we make off this, the 10 or 20% are going to make up for the 80 or 90% that lose money. And that's how they purvey the risk of returns, and that's how that business model works. And that's really, really difficult for a smaller publisher to replicate, because what usually happens in the scheme of things is 20% of the titles earn 80% of your revenue. So when you look at traditional publishing model, it's almost insanity when you think about it. It's like the shotgun blast or seemingly random dart throwing that the big industry is made of. And that's a different model than the model that indie authors are using in a digital-only approach. And so coming back to that, Dean and I sort of disagree on how that model works. And that's just fine, because I respect his opinion, and he's a smart guy, and I know that folks like Dean and Christine Catherine Rush, who I interviewed in the last episode, that folks like them have the know-how and have the smarts to understand the industry and understand how print distribution works, and understand the costs of warehousing and working with a major distributor, as opposed to just using print on demand, although they use a wonderful combination of it because they understand the ins and outs of it. But the average author doesn't have the ability to front those kinds of costs, or even the ability to learn the business, because Chris and Dean grew up in that business and they understand it inside out. And there's all of these authors who are making hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars who go to a show like Book Expo America and go, wait, this is a completely different industry. And so that's just something that I wanted to reflect on, is as I don't think either one of them are wrong. I think they're right, and they're right in the way that they approach digital, and they're right in the way they approach print. I'm just longing for the day when the right things about digital publishing and the right things about print publishing can come together, and a collaboration can happen that can prove that both of them working together, both of them working collaboratively, almost like this deal between LMBPN and Dreamscape Media, is a collaboration that's going to benefit digital publishing and audio publishing. I'm looking forward to print and digital and audio coming together in a collaborative way where everybody can make money, readers can be satisfied, and everyone can move forward instead of butting heads with each other. Of course, I'm an optimist. Well, that's it for this episode of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for bearing through all of my post-Book Expo America reflections. I hope you found something useful and valuable in this episode. If you did, I would appreciate you commenting, sharing it in social media, or just sharing it with someone that you think would benefit from this podcast. Thanks for hanging out with me for episode 78. Until episode 79 and next week, here's wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.